Hello, welcome to the Trews. Politics Week continues. We've already done the Lib Dems and UKIP, haven't we? Today it's the turn of Labour. You know from the papers and that. Ed Miliband came round here, you know, from that photo and all that kind of stuff. So let's see what happened when I spoke to Ed Miliband about the forthcoming election, about Labour and what we should do as a country. Ed, thank you for coming to talk to us here in the run-up to the election. Very grateful for you.
Pleasure.
You must be bloody worn out, are you?
No, busy, but I'm glad to be here.
A lot of us feel that what's happened in politics is that there's these unelected, powerful elites that really control things from behind the scenes, not in a conspiratorial way, just in an economic way. And those powerful elites have really got their talons into the Tory party. For me, and for a lot of people that don't vote, that's where that frustration emanates from. It certainly isn't apathy, Ed. It's a sense of, what's the point? What we feel is like, well, they, you know, the suffragettes, they may have given their lives for the right to vote. The people in power worked out, okay, we've got to give votes to women. Let's just now make sure that their votes mean very little. And and since then, since suffrage, since the right of women to vote, what has meaningfully occurred?
That's just totally wrong.
Go on, mate.
Well, look, workers' rights, a national health service, a minimum wage, lesbian and gay rights. Now, look, the whole point about this is they happen. I don't actually take the view that some politicians take, which is all about the great politicians who make the change happen. Of course, it's people that make it happen, but it's a combination of politics and people. And look, those changes, the suffragettes, incredibly important moment, the right for women to vote. But think about the Equal Pay Act in the 1970s, Barbara Castle, right? It took the
still ain't fully happened. Though,
okay, but hang on a minute.
For women.
It took the workers at Ford to make it happen, to push Barbara Castle to make it happen. But then it did happen. Now you got
not
still
entirely.
Yeah, it hasn't happened properly. But look, it's all about how does progress come. Progress comes through people demanding change, politics responding, not all the way, and people pushing for that change to carry on. But without the politics, and this is maybe just part of our, not exactly disagreement, part of the issue here, without politics, without government, the change doesn't happen. That's what happens in a democratic society.
Absolutely. Now, the frustrations that I was describing, Ed, and the thing that I think is the core of the modern issue when it comes to the disengaged and the disenfranchised people in this country at the moment, what we see is bankers committing flagrant fraud, no one going to prison. HSBC committing fraud and helping people avoid tax, nobody going to prison, no consequences.
Okay, before we get on to HSBC, I'm not trying to avoid the question, but do you accept my fundamental point?
The NHS, The NHS, of course these things are important, Ed. I think these are valuable points. My mother's only alive as a result of the National Health Service.
Exactly.
So what we are talking about now is, in the age of PFI, in the age of continuing privatisation of these public institutions, of the transference of power and wealth from ordinary people to the richest 1% and beyond to corporations and super elites. What can, as you have said, politics and people have to work in harmony. Now the people have made their disillusionment clear, their frustration clear, their loss and despair clear. You, as a politician, as the potential leader of the country, what are you going to do to take on those powerful forces that we believe are beyond politics?
Okay, but I promise you I'm not avoiding the question here. But
then you've got to answer it, mate.
I will answer it, but there's two issues here. Does politics make change happen? And what scale of change are we talking about? Yeah. Now, the problem I had with some of the things that you said is you've implied that the first is like there's no change happens. Well, it's just like wrong. It's just wrong. Change has happened and it will happen. Yeah. Now, let me come to your point.
My main point is, will you confront those powerful interests? Because, of course, there's no one in Britain that doesn't love the NHS. There's no one in Britain that would have wanted 5,000...
it was politics that had made it happen.
Well, no, as you said, it was ordinary people
and
pushing politics.
And politics.
Great, so politics is a given, people is a given. How are we going to work harmoniously to deliver what the people of Britain need right now? And what the people of Britain need is someone that's going to say, you lot, don't you worry about HSBC, don't you worry about bankers, I'm your man, I'm going to go in there and take care of this stuff.
My whole argument in this campaign, I think this is the central thing that we've got to confront as a country, is who is the country run for? Is it just run for the richest and most powerful, or is it run for the working people? I think that's the biggest question that we face as a country. I actually think it's the biggest question that most Western countries face. It's rooted in inequality, an unequal society, I think a more equal society is a more successful society. And that's why we need to have a system and a plan, that's what we've got in this election, to change the way the country works.
How do we do that, Ed? How do we do that? How do we sort of like...
I mean, look, well, you reform the banks, but we need banks that are going to work for businesses. I mean, banks are a good thing, not a bad thing.
Could we see bankers going to prison for like some of the rate rigging, the Libor scandal?
Of course, if there's fraud committed by bankers.
It's evident that there was.
Of course, if there's fraud committed by bankers, that should happen. But there's a bigger issue than that, which is how you have a banking system that works for your ordinary small businesses that need the help, for your customers that need the help, and that's what our plan does. The energy companies, we want energy companies that are successful, but we also need energy companies that aren't ripping people off and are giving people a fair deal. We want to confront the tax avoiders. We want to make sure that people don't avoid their taxes. The non-doms, the people who live in this country, work in this country,
Absolutely.
permanently settled in this country. It's what I say, it shouldn't be sort of one rule for the richest and most powerful, another rule for everybody else. It's one rule for everybody. And that's the sort of society I believe in.
Do you? That's because I think that's what a lot of us feel is tough to get purchase on. Like, for example, it's like the 850 billion that it cost to bail out the banks in 2008. Like, during the time since then, we've lost 840 billion to tax evasion. So, like, that's the kind of money that's available to be captured, which in a way sort of challenges the myth of
it was right to bail out
austerity.
the banks.
Right. I mean,
because it wasn't about the banks, it was about ordinary people's savings. You remember those queues starting to form, Northern Rock and all that? I mean, that was about ordinary people's savings and what was going to happen to ordinary people's savings.
So in a way, within the current political paradigm, we do have no choice. This feeling, which I suppose Nigel Farage capitalises on, of like ordinary people aren't. It doesn't seem like there's a real choice. So that in the end, when someone with a pint on their head turns up, it seems like a valid and interesting
I'm not planning to do
alternative.
that.
No, I don't think that's yours. That's not your speech.
I'm not sure I'd look so good with a pint on my head.
I don't think either of us would benefit from a balancing act at this moment.
Exactly.
Unless it's a sort of an economical balancing act, Ed, which is something that we really need to look at. No, like, so what it feels like to us is that whoever it is in power, those people don't operate on behalf of us, ordinary people. They operate on behalf of transnational corporations, and they operate on behalf of the financial industry. It sort of feels like, what we feel like is, there's nothing that can be done. Why is this not happening? We see these things unfold, and then there's no one goes to prison. Things don't get any better. No one proposes an alternative. That's the area.
There is an alternative. And look, it's all about, do you learn the lessons? Look, for me, and it's different for you, obviously, it's about how do you make practical change happen, practical change that people can believe in. Now, practical doesn't mean sort of non-existent. It doesn't mean not real. It means, a higher minimum wage. That is about saying, look, let's tackle inequality. Hard work should be rewarded for everybody in our country. 0 hours contracts, you probably know about 0 hours contracts. People who...
All this lot are on them.
Don't know, I'm sure they're not. I hope they're not, otherwise I'm going to get very angry with you. Look, it is about saying, is a text message at 6 a.m. in the morning to tell you whether you got work or not, is that a good way to run a country? That's where we made progress on workers' rights, but we've sort of gone backwards.
Yeah.
The NHS, opportunities for young people. This isn't like bread and butter of politics. This is what really matters to people.
For me, what I have learned is like sort of because of geopolitical influences, because of global finances, it seems that it's very difficult at a domestic level to leverage serious influence. So when we have a party...
It's just not true.
So you are in a position to confront these powerful organisations, the financial industry, transnational corporations, like say for example this little stat.
Can I just put it in a particular way to you, right? Where you may not like.
Well, it's better for me to put it in your language, and it's better for me to put it in my language, because if you can understand me, it's better.
Okay, fine.
Right. Say for example, right, like sort of average UK worker pays 20% normal tax, right? Sure. Amazon paid 0.05% on 4 billion sales.
Yeah, we've got to
do
deal
we
with
have the power to do that?
Of course you do.
How?
Well, first of all, you've got to do it internationally.
Yeah.
Because these companies are mobile around the world, and that is hard yards, but you've got to do it. And secondly, you've got to be willing to act on your own where you can. Look, there are different countries that have different ways of dealing with these things. Some are more successful than others. So of course there are ways to deal with it. It doesn't mean it's easy. in a world where capital and companies are mobile, of course you can deal with these things. And of course people share your outrage about companies that don't pay their taxes, and it can be dealt with. But you've got to have a government that is willing to say there's something wrong with this and we're going to deal with it.
You're that government.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've had a bit of a scrap with Rupert Murdoch before. There's no love lost between me and him. Like I've said this before to politicians. What it feels like, and I hope it doesn't sound adolescent, but what it feels like to us is like, if Rupert Murdoch has this kind of power, this kind of media voice, if you are like the Prime Minister of Britain, can't you just go, right, I'm Prime Minister now, we're passing some legislation that means that monopolies are going to be significantly broken up. So Rupert Murdoch, it's been great, but now you can only own 10% or 15% of total media. Is that kind of thing a possibility? Because people want it.
We said in our manifesto you've got to look at these issues of media ownership and all that. And you know, I've spoken out against Rupert Murdoch on phone hacking and what happened to ordinary members of the public who were victims of phone hacking and, you know, intrusion and all of those things. The thing I'd say to you though about this, these people are less powerful than they used to be.
Yeah, I get that.
They're less powerful than they used to be.
They're still a bit too powerful.
Yeah, look, media ownership really matters. It's something I care about. As I say, we've set out in our manifesto that we're going to definitely look at the issue. But
are you able to make proper pledges or not? Because it's too
Well, I'm not making
edgy.
a pledge now. No, it's not about edgy. You've got to look at how you make it work properly. Of course you've got to look at that. Look, I'm not diminishing Rupert Murdoch, right?
You should be diminished.
Yeah, but
diminish him down.
Yeah, okay, but he's much less powerful than he used to be. The British people have a lot more sense than some of these papers give them credit for.
Well, there's no doubt about that, but it's still a concern when you've like someone in Murdoch's power who's in it, like, because what it feels
and
like
you've got to be
us,
willing to stand up to these powerful forces, and I am.
Are you willing to?
Yeah.
The reason I have never voted in my life is because I think it don't matter which one. We all got excited about Tony Blair. We all got excited about Barack Obama. What happened?
I know,
But
hang on a minute. Look, this is an important point. I'm not looking for euphoria, right? I know that sounds a bit weird. Obviously, you know, I want to get rid of the Tory government, and that's going to be a very good thing for the country. First of all, you don't want politicians saying, vote for me and on day one the world is transformed. It ain't going to be like that. Right? It ain't going to be like that. Change is hard, right?
Yes.
Change takes time, and I'm not being a civil servant. I'm just saying that that's the reality. That's the first point. Secondly, you know, change happens not in a kind of, you know, it requires pressure, and it takes effort, and it takes people to demand the change to happen. So I'm not looking for euphoria. I'm looking for, you know, a sense of this is real, concrete, deliverable change. But I actually think that's what people want. I think that we're in a world where people are past the idea of, you know, this bloke comes along and he says, vote for Ed Miliband, and if I'm in Downing Street on day one, life is kind of totally turned upside down. First of all, I don't think people want it, and secondly, I don't think people would believe it. I think people want, you know, kind of a sense that the country's run in a different way, that it's run for them again. I think the fundamental problem with this country is that people think it's run for somebody else, and the somebody else is probably somebody right at the top of society. They've got the access, the influence, the power, and it's not run for them. And that's what we've got to change.
that is exactly it. That is exactly it. What we need to feel, normal people, is that there is the will in politicians, that they're getting into politics not because of cronyism, not because of careerism, but because they want to represent ordinary people in the face of powerful elites that seem to somehow be beyond the grasp of ordinary politics, whether it's the financial sector, this sort of housing crisis that's going on in London, where it's before our eyes being socially cleansed of ordinary people, while towers, empty towers that are essentially money, never built to be lived in, are erected all over the place. There's a real sense that how is this happening? There's nothing we can do. And I completely agree with you, Ed. We don't want some sort of giddy, yes we can euphoria. We want a bloke who's going to say, look, I'm in this for the right reasons. I'm prepared to take on Murdoch. I'm prepared to take on HSBC. I'm prepared to take on the powerful elites that have got control of the Tory party, that if the Tory party were given any longer in charge of this country, could drive it into the ground, the very fabric of society itself being torn apart by them and the vested interests of powerful elites. I think people don't want euphoria at this time. I think people want security and stability and an end to that fear.
Yeah. Well, look, I agree with you that the prospect of another 5 years of the Tories is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Incredibly dangerous for who the country works for. It's incredibly dangerous for the NHS. It's incredibly dangerous for, you know, I think their fundamental view is that the only way we succeed as a country is low pay, insecurity for most people, and, you know, the wealthiest get their tax cuts and the wealth trickles down to somebody else. And that's what we've got to change about the country. And we can change it. And look, I think we need to encourage people to to vote and be part of that change, not on the basis, as you say, of giddy euphoria, but on the basis of things can be, look, I've got a simple idea, which is Britain can be better. The Tories want to say this is as good as it gets for the country. And this isn't as good as it gets for the country. This can't be as good as it gets for the country. And I think that is about where the stakes are.
So there we are. I think we learned a lot about Labour. We learned a lot about Ed Miliband. It's not a perfect interview, but personally I found it a very interesting experience. And I think it says a lot about Ed Miliband that he understands the way that media works now, the way that the country feels at the moment, the way that people feel, that he was prepared to come around here and talk to us at the Trews. Trews Politics Week continues. Tomorrow we're talking to the Greens. We're going to be talking to Natalie Bennett and Caroline Lucas. We go to them. They are women. Politeness does mean something in Britain today. I'm just a normal guy from Essex. Watch the Trews tomorrow. Politics Weeks continues. True News, subscribe here.
Nose is a tool that is abused to fool you and to leave you scared and confused. Trews is like the nose. If the nose was true, I want some Trews. Let's have some Trews.